you should make, Misters Brown and Hamilton.
It's a few other than land. It occurs to me that the expense of transportation would be material.
Come over to him. Wake him up in the middle of the night.
An unspeakable happiness.
Platt! Where's the boy called Platt?
There was once a man named Solomon Northup, born free, living in the calm rhythm of upstate New York, a devoted husband, a loving father, and a man gifted with the violin. His home was filled with laughter, with music, with the quiet pride of an honest life. He was respected in his community and earned his living performing for the townsfolk, his bow gliding across the strings like poetry. One afternoon, a friend introduced him to two well-dressed strangers.
Misters Brown and Hamilton.
Sir?
Mr. Northup.
They were showmen, men of promise and persuasion, offering him a chance to travel to Washington, D.C. to perform. The pay was generous, $1 for every day, $3 for every night. For a family man of modest means, it was an opportunity too good to turn away. Trusting their words, Solomon packed his violin and joined them. They dined together in celebration, the night filled with laughter, toasts, and talk of success. But the next morning, Solomon woke in darkness, wrists and ankles shackled, his head pounding, his body weak. Panic filled his chest. The elegant men who had promised him music and money had instead delivered him into captivity. When guards arrived, Solomon insisted he was a free man from New York, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. They beat him brutally, accusing him of being a runaway slave from Georgia. In that moment, Solomon's world shattered. His freedom, his family, his very name, all stripped away. In their place, a single word carved into his existence: Platt. He was not alone. Around him were others, men, women, and even children torn from their homes and bound for the unknown. They were herded onto a ship, chained below deck. That night, the despair grew heavier when a white man crept into the women's quarters and forced himself upon a mother. When another man tried to defend her, he was stabbed to death, his body thrown into the ocean by morning. In those waters, Solomon saw how cheap a human life could become. When they reached the port, the captives were lined up like cattle. One by one, names were called and lives were sold. When the trader shouted Platt, Solomon didn't respond. He told them that wasn't his name, but the lash silenced his protest. Soon, they were taken to a grand house where human beings stood naked before buyers, appraised like goods on a shelf. A man named William Ford bought Solomon, along with a woman named Eliza and her 2 young children. She begged for her babies not to be separated, promising she would serve for life if only he bought them too.
You will have the most faithful slave in me, the most faithful slave that's ever lived, but I beg that you do not separate us.
Ford tried, but the dealer refused. The children could bring more profit if sold separately. Eliza's screams echoed through the room as her children were torn away, and Solomon watched, powerless, as her heart broke before his eyes. Ford, though still a slave owner, showed Solomon rare decency. On his plantation, Solomon worked cutting timber and hauling lumber. His education and intelligence could not stay hidden forever. And soon, he suggested an idea to transport the heavy logs through a nearby canal, saving time and effort. The plan worked perfectly, and Ford, impressed, rewarded him with a violin. For a moment, Solomon felt the faint warmth of respect, but that success made others burn with jealousy. One overseer, consumed with hatred, mocked Solomon, accusing him of arrogance. Their argument turned violent, and though Solomon defended himself, it sealed his fate. If you have enjoyed the video, consider subscribing, as it helps us grow and make more content you like. Later, the overseer returned with 2 men, tied Solomon's hands, looped a rope around his neck, and left him hanging from a tree, his toes barely touching the ground, struggling for air. Hours passed. People walked by as if he were invisible. His life dangled between breath and death until Ford finally arrived and cut him down. But even Ford couldn't protect him anymore. "He'll kill you if you stay," Ford said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. "I've sold you to keep you alive."
You must know that I'm not a slave.
I cannot hear that.
Before I came to you, I was a free man.
And so, Solomon was sent to a new master, Edwin Epps, a man whose cruelty knew no limits. Life under Epps was torment. The slaves worked endless hours in the cotton fields, their every movement watched. Each night, their harvest was weighed. Any who picked less than 100 pounds were whipped. One woman, Patsy, gathered twice that amount. She was strong, graceful, and unbreakable, and because of that, Epps desired her. His obsession was as dark as his temper, and his wife poisoned by jealousy. Hated Patsy for it. When night fell, Epps often forced his slaves to dance for his amusement, their bodies too exhausted to move. One evening, his wife shattered a bottle across Patsy's face, screaming in rage. Epps refused to sell her, not out of kindness but possession. She was his property, and he would not let her go. The violence grew worse. Epps's wife sent Solomon on errands, testing him, asking if he could read or write. He denied it, knowing the truth could get him killed. On one trip to town, Solomon thought about escape and ran toward the woods, only to find other fugitives hanging lifeless from trees. He stopped, trembling, realizing freedom meant death if he was caught. He returned to the plantation quietly, his heart heavy, but still beating with one small ember of hope. Years dragged on. The days blurred into one another, pain, labor, and the silence of endurance. Patsy suffered the worst. Each night, she was violated and beaten, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. One evening, broken beyond repair, she handed Solomon a ring she had stolen and whispered a desperate plea, "End my suffering."
Why would you consign me to damnation with such an
"Let me die." Solomon's heart broke. He refused. She begged again, tears in her voice, but he couldn't do it. Patsy turned away, her spirit fading into the shadows as the years passed. Drought destroyed Epps's crops, and to save his finances, he sent his slaves to work on a sugarcane plantation. There, Solomon played the violin at a wedding and earned a few coins. For a brief moment, he remembered who he once was, a man of music, of art, of family. But soon they were sent back, and the whips greeted them once more. A poor white worker joined them, and unlike others, he treated the slaves with decency. Solomon saw a glimmer of trust and offered him a deal, money in exchange for mailing a letter to his family. The man agreed, took the money, and promised to help.
Do me the favor I require, but I beg you not to expose me if you cannot grant the request.
But not long after, Epps came stumbling drunk into the quarters, muttering that one of his slaves could read and write. He threatened Solomon, waving a knife, but Solomon stayed calm, insisting the rumor was false. "He's lying to earn your favor," Solomon said. Epps, half satisfied, lowered his weapon. When he left, Solomon quietly burned the letter he had written. Watching the paper curl into ashes, his only bridge to freedom disappearing into smoke, days turned into years. Hope became a faint whisper. Then one day, Patsy vanished. Epps raged, fearing she had escaped, only for her to return later, saying she'd gone to another plantation to borrow soap. He didn't believe her. Fueled by jealousy and fury, he tied her to a tree, handed Solomon a whip, and demanded he beat her.
He pantomimes.
Solomon hesitated, but Epps cocked his gun and screamed, "Do it or die." Tears filled Solomon's eyes as he struck her once, then again, each lash cutting deeper than the last. Patsy's cries echoed across the fields until she collapsed, her back torn open. Then Epps took the whip himself and unleashed his rage until she was unconscious. That night, broken and hollow, Solomon smashed his violin into pieces. The last link to his old life was gone. Time moved on. And a new carpenter named Samuel Bass arrived to work for EPs. He was different, kind, fair, unafraid to speak the truth. One day, when Epps offered him a drink, Bass declined. Epps sneered, calling him soft. But Bass looked him in the eye and said, "You see the sweat on my skin, but ignore the blood of the men who labor for you.
You have the right to hold a nigger, but begging the law's pardon ain't lie."
How would you feel if you were in their place? Epps laughed, but Solomon listened, and in Bass, he sensed something he hadn't felt in years: compassion. Days later, while working together, Solomon found the courage to speak. He told Bass everything, how he had been born, free, kidnapped, sold, and enslaved. He begged him to send a message to his family in New York. Bass hesitated, knowing it was dangerous, but finally nodded. "If it brings you freedom," he said, "then it's worth the risk." Months passed. Then, one morning, as Solomon worked in the fields, a carriage appeared in the distance. Two men stepped out. One was a sheriff, the other a familiar face. When Solomon looked closer, tears welled in his eyes. It was Mr. Parker, the shopkeeper from back home. The sheriff called out, "Who here is called Platt?" Solomon stepped forward. "Is that your true name?" he asked. Solomon's voice trembled. "No, my name is Solomon Northup." He answered every question, his wife's name, his children's, his town, and each answer matched the records. The sheriff's eyes softened. "You are a free man," he said quietly. Epps tried to protest, but Parker warned him coldly, "Touch him, and I'll see you hang." Solomon turned to the fields one last time. Behind him, the slaves watched silently. Among them was Patsy, her eyes full of sorrow. She called his name, and he went to her, holding her one last time. She wept as he whispered goodbye. As the carriage rolled away, the plantation grew smaller in the distance, but the weight of those left behind stayed heavy in Solomon's heart. When he finally reached home, the world he knew had changed. His children were grown, his daughter married, holding a baby boy, Solomon Northup Stanton. His wife stood before him, tears streaming down her face. He stepped forward, trembling, and embraced them all. After 12 long years of chains and cruelty, Solomon Northup was home free again, but forever changed by the years that had been stolen from him.